Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. Let's head into the garden and take a look at what's growing today. So as we head into the garden, over here we have the broccoli bed. And we did a garden tour together maybe 2 weeks ago or so, and if you watch that one, you'll notice a lot of growth. I'm going to go ahead and open up the netting here so we can take a closer look at this broccoli. I like to grow my broccoli under that netting because in my experience, it is the best way to prevent cabbage worms from laying eggs on these plants, which would then, hatch into voracious little caterpillars. There are ways that you can deal with a cabbage worm infestation as well, but in my experience, prevention is the easier option and probably the more eco-friendly option as well, so I like to keep it covered. So some of these broccoli plants, broccoli is one of those plants that always amazes me with how large it gets. I don't see any signs of broccoli heads yet, which I'm actually glad about because that means the larger the plant has a chance to grow before actually starting to produce a head, the larger the broccoli head should be. But I don't think it'll be all that long before some of these plants start producing broccoli heads for us. In this broccoli bed here, I have 3 different varieties of broccoli. Unfortunately, I mixed up the tags of a lot of them, so there's only, I think, 3, one of each variety basically, 3 plants in this bed that I actually know which variety they are. So we will see as the season goes on. They have different maturity dates, so as we start to get broccoli heads, I should hopefully be able to figure out which is which, but either way, it's all going to be delicious broccoli. So whether or not I know what variety it is, we'll still get to enjoy a delicious harvest. So in between the broccoli plants, you'll see that I did plant, this is an oak tree that planted itself, but you can see I did plant a living mulch of lettuce in addition to the wood chip mulch that I have. Now, as I mentioned in my previous garden tour, we did have a heavy rain after I planted the seed, so you can see this lettuce seed was supposed to be a nice strip here, and instead it all washed down and, germinated in a clump. But we've got lots of lettuce growing throughout this broccoli bed. On this side must have been a little more protected from the rain. You can see it germinated a little bit more evenly. And we've got lots of lettuce here, just about ready to harvest. This section didn't initially germinate, so I did come through and reseed, which is germinating well. So that actually works out well, because by the time the other lettuce is wrapping up, that lettuce should be just ready to harvest, which will extend my lettuce harvest season a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and cover up this bed and we'll move on to the next one. Now at the end of the broccoli bed here, you can see I have some little flowers and herbs growing as companion plants. We've got some chamomile, some poppies, zinnia, snapdragons. These should be really pretty in coming days. And across the path here, this is my sauce tomato bed. Now the last time we did a garden tour, I think maybe 2 weeks ago or so, I don't think I had any tomatoes planted out here. I can't remember if I had any or if I had just a couple. But either way, my tomatoes are fully planted out now. This tomato bed here does need to be staked. You can see I have my pile of stakes against the fence here. So these are all sauce tomatoes. I was going to say these are all determinate tomatoes, but I actually do have a couple San Marzanos in this bed as well. These couple rows here are Roma tomatoes, which are determinates. That means that they will yield their crop pretty much all at once. But over on the end here, I do have some San Marzanos as well, and those are indeterminates, which means they should go pretty much all season. So moving on here, we have the cherry tomato bed. So I planted 9 cherry tomatoes in this bed here, which admittedly is a little bit closer spacing than is really recommended. But I did plant these cherry tomatoes here. I find that with cherry tomatoes, you can get away with a little bit tighter spacing. So we'll see how they do. Now, I mentioned 9 different tomatoes here. One of them did not make it. For some reason, every season, it seems like I have 1 or 2 varieties that just doesn't do well. And this year, one of the varieties was the Rebel Starfighter Prime. I started 3 seedlings of that variety and none of them made it. So I'm not sure what it was about this year's weather that they didn't like. But, this was the only one that actually made it to transplant, and that one did not survive transplanting. So I do have an empty spot over there. I was going to say I may pick up a tomato variety, but I think I'm actually going to clone one of my tomato plants by clipping off a sucker. I'll take you along for that journey. If we do that, it's super easy. But I have 8 different cherry tomatoes in this bed, and each one is a different variety. So this first one is a Sun Gold. This is my classic favorite. And next to it, I have the Sun Gold Select, which is a very similar variety. And this is actually a stabilized version. Sun Gold is a hybrid. Sun Gold Select is open pollinated, meaning that if I save the seeds from that, the genetics are stabilized, so the seeds should be just like the parent plant. I find that both of those varieties are extremely similar. So as far as for increasing the variety in my garden, I don't think I really need both of them. And I slightly prefer the Sun Gold. I think it has a slightly better yield, although I do really love both of them. The taste is very similar. I do like to always grow at least 1 or 2 plants of the Sun Gold Select as well for the seed saving opportunity that I mentioned. Now, while I will always continue to grow the Sun Gold, I always like to save seeds from my Sun Gold Select. That way, in case there's ever any kind of seed shortage or crop failure or anything like that, I have a guaranteed source of seed from my favorite cherry tomato. Now, I haven't had an issue in the past getting Sun Gold seeds, but there have been other varieties that I've been unable to find some years, and I just like the security of just knowing that I have my own source of these seeds. So while I'm not doing anything at the moment to completely isolate these blooms from cross-pollination, these 2 blooms, you can see these are kind of winding down now. These were the first blooms to open. This Sun Gold does have a bloom on here. I don't know if you can really see it. Behind here, it has a bloom that did just open this morning. So these blooms here should have already been pollinated. So what I'm going to do is save seeds from these 2 specific tomatoes once they ripen. Now moving on, over here I have a black cherry tomato. This tomato I actually purchased from a local nursery because my black cherry seeds did not germinate. Here we have Sun Sugar, which is a very similar variety to the Sun Gold. I have always planned to grow both varieties and do a side-by-side comparison. I think I have actually tried to do it once in the past, and I don't even really remember what happened. I think I had them in two different spots of the garden with different growing conditions, and I didn't really feel like it was a fair comparison. So here I have them side by side in the same part of the garden. So they're both delicious. I know if you really get into, like tomato culture online, you'll find some people that strongly prefer the Sun Gold and some people that strongly prefer the Sun Sugar. I love them both. I don't really know if I have a preference, but I just decided to grow both of them and maybe see if I have a preference. Here I have the Matt's Wild Cherry Tomato. This is a delightful small fruited red tomato. And there in the center, I have the Red Centiflora, which is another red tomato. That's a medium-sized red tomato that's kind of hard to see from this angle, but if you look at this giant cluster of buds that's just forming, you'll see that this is a very prolific producer. I have 2 varieties of cherry tomatoes that produce those massive clusters of buds. We have the Red Centiflora and also the Berry's Crazy Cherry, which is a yellow variety. I find that those both yield an incredible amount of tomatoes, and they're both delicious, so they're great options to grow. So around this side, this is the Berry's Crazy Cherry that I just mentioned, and here we have Rosella, which produces dark purple cherry tomatoes. So you can see lots of variety coming in the future. We'll head back here to this back corner of the garden bed. You can see these really large parsley plants overwintered from last year. Those will be going to seed really soon. You can see this one here actually sent up this really large center stalk, which I did harvest. That was this plant trying to produce flowers and ultimately seeds. This is a fresh parsley plant, and I think I've got a couple more little parsley plants in here, along with a little patch of leeks in the back. You can see these are still small, but they've actually grown quite a bit since the last garden tour. We've got some flowers and herbs mixed in here. We've got cosmos, zinnias, calendula, chamomile. I've got some dill back there. Feverfew. These are actually perennials, these feverfew here. So we're going to see if they come back. And then over here, you can see this parsley also overwintered and is trying to go to seed. And we've got some more fresh parsley here as well. Since these parsley plants are getting so large and really about to switch their production to flowers, I think I'm going to go ahead and harvest the whole plants of those and freeze the leaves. We'll see, I may let one go to seed and save some seeds, but I do have plenty of parsley seeds already, so we'll see. So here we have a mixed brassica bed with a little bit of a focus on kale, you'll see, but I've got lots of different brassicas in here. These are cauliflowers, which are starting to get really lovely and hopefully will yield some delicious cauliflower for us soon. This is a blue curled Scotch kale that overwintered from last year. I'm letting this go to seed to try to collect some seeds from this variety. I do need new seeds of this variety. And then I'm going to go ahead and harvest this whole plant. Here we've got more different kales. This is a dazzling blue lacinato type kale. This is blue curled Scotch that I just planted this year. So you can see the difference between that plant and this one, which has gone to seed. Got red Russian kale, more dazzling blue. This is actually getting a little bit tall for the cover I have. You can see some of the leaves are bent against the cover. And over here, we've got a red Russian kale that's also gone to seed. You can see they get these little bud clusters that look sort of like tiny broccoli florets. This is another one that I need new seeds from, so I'm going to let this go to seed. And then we've got some more cauliflower and a little bit of cabbage mixed in. This time of year, I don't really think there's anything more beautiful in the vegetable garden than a bed of mixed kale greens. It just comes in so many different shades of green and so many different textures. It's just really, really beautiful to me. So this is probably my favorite bed to look at this time of year. Unfortunately, similar to the broccoli, I do keep this covered up to prevent, cabbage worms will target anything in this family. They'll target the broccoli, the kale, the cauliflower, cabbage. They love all of that. So unfortunately, in order to keep my plants safe from them, I do have to keep them covered up for the most part. But when I do uncover them, they're really beautiful. Now, across the walkway from the kale bed, I have my lettuce patch. You can see my arugula is all going to seed. Arugula bolts very easily. I find it kind of challenging to grow for that reason. It's hard to get a good harvest before it really goes to seed. But here I have lots of lettuce, and you can see that I have been harvesting on this pretty heavily. And you can see it's coming back. I harvested these lettuce plants here, and they're regrowing with new leaves. So I find that harvesting this way, I get lots of lettuce. So you'll notice throughout my garden, I have lots of different places where I'm growing lettuce, and it's all in various stages of growth. That's to try to maximize my lettuce harvest and maximize a long season of harvest. This was my first planted lettuce patch here, and you can see it's very mature. As I said, we've been harvesting from it. The lettuce and the broccoli I have not harvested yet, but we'll be starting, by the time this lettuce here is pretty much done, it will be time to harvest the lettuce and the broccoli. So, my goal is to keep planting more lettuce and to hopefully extend my harvest as long as possible. I have never been able to extend my lettuce harvest the entire season. Usually I can get into about midsummer harvesting lettuce, and then I take a little break, and then I'll plant more lettuce for a fall harvest later. But the summer tends to get pretty hot and humid here. By planting it behind these tomato plants, which we'll go look at in a second, I'm able to extend it a little bit because those tomato plants will grow up and produce shade for the lettuce, which keeps it a little bit cooler. So we're going to go around to the front of this bed here and take a look at the tomatoes that I mentioned. So these tomatoes are newly planted since the last garden tour. So here I have a Russian Big Roma. I purchased this from a local nursery because I didn't have seeds for this variety. But this is an heirloom tomato, so I will plan to save seeds from this and grow it myself next year. Next, we have a New Yorker tomato. This is a new variety I'm growing for the first time. You can see I have not been pruning the suckers off of this tomato plant. This is because it is a determinate variety, and you get a better yield from those by not pruning the suckers. I did post a video recently talking about the differences between determinate and indeterminate tomato varieties. So I will go ahead and link that below in case you have any interest in watching that. So I do like to grow my slicer tomatoes on these trellis walls here. As you can see, I have not been attaching them to the walls yet, but that is something that I will probably be starting to do sometime this week. You can see they are getting quite a bit taller. I find that these walls provide better support for these types of tomatoes. You can see how high it goes there, much higher than a tomato cage does. Now, I'm not going to be completely against tomato cages and say don't use them. I mean, you could see my cherry tomatoes are all in tomato cages. I have various tomatoes in tomato cages throughout my garden. That is not my preferred method of support, but there are times when, you just have to make do with what you have, and tomato cages work well enough that I'll still continue to use them, even though When I have the option to grow my tomatoes on a wall like this instead, I find that it works a little bit better for them. So we're gonna go across the walkway here. You can see that I have all these violet leaves ripped up. These violets grow pretty wild all along the edges of my garden beds, and I let them grow. I like to see their flowers, and I let them grow until they start to interfere with the plants in my beds. And then I just either pull them out or take the leaves off and just let them basically decompose in the walkways. So over here is my second tomato bed. You can see I've got a similar trellis wall here, and we've got more tomato varieties. This tomato variety, or this tomato plant, I'm pleased to see is making a recovery. This one, the roots were nibbled and it completely wilted. I stuck it a little farther in the soil and it seems like it's rerooting and actually going to be successful. So we will see how that goes. Now I have a lot of spots throughout the garden where you can see I've pushed the mulch aside. That's because I've planted seeds. So here I stuck in some seeds for a bush watermelon variety. I've got a couple rows of bush beans here. I recognize that this watermelon, even though it is a bush variety, will sprawl, and we'll hope that all these plants just play nice. Over here we've got another bush watermelon and a couple more rows of bush bean seeds here. Now across the walkway on this side, we've got similar. You can see on the front we have tomatoes, so we'll go around and look at those in a minute. Where I have these furrows like this, so in these little trenches here, I actually pushed the mulch aside as best I could and planted rows of carrot seeds. I have not really been successful growing carrots in the past, but I decided to go ahead and give it a try this year, and we'll hope for the best. So we did have a rain which kind of washed some of this mulch back into the little furrow here, which isn't ideal because carrot seeds are very small and have a hard time germinating, so we'll just keep an eye on this and see. Here I planted some bush beans, which you can see are coming up nicely. I do have 2 spots where they're not germinating, so I'm going to keep an eye on those, and I may come out and replant some seeds if I need to. Here I have another variety of carrot, and it looks like we are starting to get some little bits of germination here, so hopefully these do well. Got a little bit of celery here, zinnia, some calendula, lots of different flowers and lovely plants. I find that planting all those flowers and herbs, all these beautiful companion plants, right mixed in with all the vegetables really does make a difference in the garden. I find that it attracts more pollinators, more beneficial insects, just adds some biodiversity to the garden, which leads to a healthier garden in general. And it's just beautiful. You know, I find that I really enjoy spending time in the garden more when I make it a place that is useful but also really beautiful. So going around to the front of this garden bed here, you can see we have some poppies. It won't be too long before these are blooming. But here is my third tomato bed in the garden. And this tomato here, similarly to the one we mentioned back there, this one I accidentally snapped when I was moving seedlings around in my deck. I tried to save it, but the roots just were too far gone. So I stuck this in the soil, and you can see this has rooted and looks beautiful and healthy too. And more tomato plants. So I do need to come out, similarly to the others, and start clipping these onto the wall that they're going to be climbing here. Got some marigold zinnias. These spots here where the soil's pushed aside, you can see I've got another spot here. I have planted some zucchini seeds, which haven't germinated yet, but hopefully they will soon. So when I plan my garden, I don't usually plan everything out, in a lot of detail. I plan the main things, like for example, on these trellis walls, I know I'm going to grow tomatoes. I plan the main crop that's going to be in each bed, but then I also know that I have a lot of other seeds that I'm going to sow. I have the zucchini, I have the bush beans, the carrots, the lettuce, lots of plants like that. And I just kind of come out once the main plants are planted. I just come out and find a space where it seems like those will look good. And we throw them in the ground, and the garden is a little different every year, and I really enjoy that variety. Now, if we walk over here, you can see my potato patch. This was a new no-dig garden bed that I just established this year. I basically covered this whole area with cardboard, laid down a nice thick layer of compost on top of it, and then on top of that, a nice thick layer of wood chips. And so far, the potatoes seem to be doing well. I did have some concerns. You can see I have one that's wilty. Not even wilty, this one's actually been removed. So there's definitely been something rummaging through these potato beds. I'm not sure what it is, but my potatoes overall look healthy, but I have seen some damage like that. We've got a huge, beautiful comfrey plant here. Back here, I mentioned that something had been digging. In the last garden tour, these potatoes on the end were planted later and had not sprouted yet. I mentioned that something had been digging in there, and I was afraid that it may have dug up my potatoes, but as you can see, they are sprouting now. They're behind the others, but that's because they were planted a couple weeks later. And I don't know, so I'm not sure what was rummaging in there, but apparently my potatoes are still growing. So I'm not super hopeful about this potato bed, partly just because, as I said, there is something doing something in there. I don't really know what, but we'll keep an eye on it and hopefully get some potatoes. Now along the front of the potato bed here, I have planted bush beans in all of these little spots where the mulch is disturbed. I just planted this a couple days ago, so it'll be a little while before we see some germination, but hopefully soon. And then I've just got some companion plants for beauty along the edges here. Every spot that I've mentioned where I have bush beans planted has a different variety. These are red swan bush beans. I also have some jade green bush beans. I have some royal burgundy purple bush beans and some golden wax beans, which are yellow. So, there should be a nice variety of bush beans, assuming all of these plants germinate and do well. So I'm really excited for harvesting some beautiful multicolored beans. So around the back of this tomato bed here, you can see we have another lettuce patch. I did have a little bit more sporadic germination in this bed. So I came out the other day and re-sowed some lettuce seeds in some of these bare spots. And hopefully, we did get some heavy rain after that, so I'm hoping they didn't get washed away. You never know, I might have a walkway filled with lettuce plants. So this lettuce patch here is the second spot that I sowed, and this is part of my plan to keep extending the lettuce harvest as long as possible. And over here, this arugula, I've been doing a little better about keeping this arugula harvested so that it hopefully doesn't go to seed as quickly as the arugula over there, which went to seed pretty much immediately. So I've been harvesting this pretty well and mixing it in with my lettuce. Now this plant here, I think that this is red sorrel. Last year in this section, I planted a mixed greens variety, and this one was a perennial and came back. So I think this is red sorrel. Maybe some of you can correct me if I'm wrong. If this is in fact red sorrel, I would love to hear any uses that you have for it, because I have no idea what to do with this. Finally, for this main garden, before we head over to the garden expansion, I'm going to uncover this, and you can kind of see some of the cabbages that I have growing in there, but we'll uncover this and take a closer look. So this is also a mixed brassica bed, but this one's a little more focused on cabbage. You can see my cabbages are looking really lovely. I have 3 varieties of cabbage here. We've got an early Jersey Wakefield. I've got a Savoy cabbage. You can see this has the crinkly leaves. And then we have red acre cabbage, which is a beautiful purple cabbage. So I've got a mix of those along with some kales. You can see I have kales here in the center. And a little bit of a perennial scallion patch. So I'm really excited to harvest some of these. So as an aside, we don't eat a real lot of cabbage. It's not something that I'm really familiar with cooking. So I would love to hear suggestions for how to cook this. I know probably some of you are going to suggest sauerkraut. I'm not a huge fan of sauerkraut, so I'm looking for other suggestions. I do like to sometimes make an egg roll in a bowl, which has a lot of cabbage in it. And I do sometimes like to kind of saute some cabbage up with some bacon and onions, which is really delicious as well. But I'm looking for other ways to use this cabbage. So go ahead and include your best cabbage recipes in the comments. So I realized I almost forgot to show you the ends of the beds here. We have these cattle panel trellises, which make a beautiful focal point for the garden once things really grow in. So along the edges of the beds here, I have planted beans. You can see these are just starting to come up. And those will grow up this cattle panel and be really beautiful as the season goes on. You can see over here, they're starting to come up as well. And then back here, I don't see any germination on this side, but, oh, no, there's one. This is going to be beans as well. And on this side, we took a little bit of a chance and planted some beans early, which you can see are coming up. This giant wild clump of beans is actually volunteer beans that planted themselves from last year, so I do need to thin those out. They should not be growing that close together. But these that are normally spaced, we did plant. And here I have cucumber seedlings coming up, and they actually look like they are not getting seriously eaten. It has been one of the ongoing sagas of my garden the past few years that my cucumber seeds have been eaten, or my seedlings have been eaten, pretty much as soon as they sprout. So for the past, I think 3 years, I have historically always directly sown my cucumbers because that's what they prefer. They tend to grow into stronger, healthier plants that way if they don't have their roots disturbed. But every year they have been eaten, and so I've had to resort to starting some cucumber seeds in little pots on my deck, growing them out till they're big enough to withstand the pests, and then transplanting them out here. So I did start some on my deck this year, and I started them actually slightly earlier than I planted these seeds here. So this one here has been eaten pretty severely, and this is usually what happens to all of them. And then the next day something comes along and eats the rest of it and they don't survive. But a lot of these have actually been surviving this year. So that's interesting. I'm not sure why. As I mentioned, I do have the cucumber seedlings that we started on the deck together. So I'll just take those and I'll come in and I'll pop those in any bare spots where seedlings either didn't germinate or were eaten. So we should have a beautiful cucumber crop this year. You can see my irises are just starting to bloom and looking beautiful as we head over to the side yard garden. Here's another little patch of irises. So these should be beautiful over the next week or two for us. So here is the side yard garden expansion. Incidentally, we are right across the fence from my chicken coop, and it is early in the morning, so it is prime egg laying time for the ladies. So you'll probably hear lots of noises coming from the chicken coop. So let's go ahead and take a look at this raised bed garden expansion. My little perennial herb patch right on the edge is waking up nicely. We've got lavender here. Feverfew I just planted this year. I've got some sage. And down here I've got my skullcap, which I'm really excited for this to come in a little more and to make a fresh tincture with this for medicinal purposes. And this bed here, this is an example of what I was saying about using tomato cages when it works for you. I have 5 tomato plants growing in this bed here, along with some lovely companions. My basil looks like it's getting nibbled a little bit. We've actually had a lot of unseasonably cold weather the past week or so. It's been definitely colder than I appreciate, and I'm sure colder than my plants appreciate as well. Has not been anywhere close to freezing, so I'm not worried about my plants getting killed by a frost or anything like that. But they haven't been as happy as they would be. Today is actually supposed to be warmer, and this coming week is supposed to be pretty warm, so I'm hoping that these plants they should really just bounce back and do really well with the warmer temperatures coming. These basils are ones that really do not appreciate the cold we've been having, so with the warmer weather, these should perk right up. So as I said, tomatoes in here, nasturtiums. I did just plant some seeds in these little spots where the mulch has been pushed aside for Kajari melons to hopefully climb this trellis. On the other side of the trellis here, I'm just starting to see the first germination. These are Vortex green beans that I planted. The main crop of green beans is going to be in the main garden that we already looked at, but I decided to plant a few of my Vortex green beans in this section of the garden where there are not going to be any other pole beans growing, and at the moment no bush beans either. The idea is that these beans that I'm planting over here are just for seed saving. We may harvest the first few and eat them because it's been my experience that these plants produce many beans, and even if we harvest the first flush of beans, we will definitely get lots more beans later that we can let dry in the plants and use for seed saving. The reason I'm planting these beans over here to save the seeds is because that isolates them from possible cross-pollination by the other bean varieties that I have growing in the main garden. So in my ongoing efforts to thin out the amount of plants on my deck, I did plant a couple pepper plants in pots out here in the main garden. So these just got planted over the weekend, and once we get some warm weather and they settle in, those should do really well. So here's my asparagus patch that is honestly kind of struggling. I'm not super happy with how it's doing. If you've been following along with me for a while, you know the saga of the asparagus. Just on the other side of the asparagus patch, it's across a stone wall and several feet down. I have a raspberry patch, which somehow managed to, send its runners several feet over and several feet up and pop up in the asparagus patch. And it's not only the raspberries. I have other perennial weeds that are, interfering with my asparagus as well. So this area here, I have been debating about what to do for the past few years. What I'm considering now is trying to pull out the asparagus roots, not right now, probably in the fall, transplant them. And what I'm thinking of doing is in this same area here, I'm thinking of putting down a raised bed, a nice long thin raised bed, and putting landscape fabric at the bottom of it so nothing should be able to come up, and then replanting the asparagus roots in that raised bed. I don't know if that's a good idea or not. That's something that I'm toying around with and considering doing probably in the fall when the asparagus is dormant. So let me know if you have any thoughts on that. I'm not sure if anyone has grown asparagus in that type of situation. Most of the raised beds I have in this garden here are a foot tall, you can see. For the asparagus, if I were to do that, since it wouldn't have access to the ground underneath, with the landscape fabric as a barrier, I'd probably get a bed that's a little bit taller, maybe 18 inches or so. So let me know, what would you do in this situation? I'm definitely open to alternative ideas, but have not really come up with anything better at the moment. Now down here I have some cherry tomatoes in pots on the end here, and I'm experimenting. You can see this is a sweet potato plant. I'm experimenting with my sweet potatoes a little bit this year. So this bed here is another tomato bed / sweet potato bed. I'm not sure how well you can see, but in between these tomato plants on the ground, I have planted some sweet potatoes. These are not looking amazing right now because I just got these in the ground a couple days ago, and they need some warmth, and they need to settle in and sink their roots into the soil. But the idea is that these tomato plants will get tall and grow up, and the sweet potatoes will kind of cover the ground as a mulch. So I am kind of experimenting and wondering if these are plants that can be planted and grow well together. So as I said, an experiment, so definitely stay tuned and I will keep you updated as to how that goes. In addition to the tomatoes and sweet potatoes, I have some other plants here. I realize that by the end of the season, when these sweet potatoes really get going, they'll probably crowd out some of these, but I'm hoping to get some enjoyment out of these, at least earlier in the season. Now, as a note, these are red onions that I grew here last year from sets, or not from sets, from transplants that I purchased online. So these plants overwintered. I think it's the red wing variety. As I said, I purchased it from an onion farm online and planted them. I missed harvesting these because they didn't get all that large, and now I have these that I was planning to just keep in the bed and harvest as scallions. I actually did harvest one of these to use as a scallion the other day, and I'll show you a picture of it here on the screen. It's interesting because it wasn't bulbing at all. It really did look like a scallion, but it was red, and it had split and formed, two onions. So I wasn't sure. As I said, I think this is the red wing variety. I'm not sure if this would kind of possibly perennialize and split and kind of propagate itself that way. I'm not really sure. Onions are supposed to be biennials. They're not supposed to be perennials. But I figured, once I saw that, I would leave these in the ground and we'll see what happens with them. They're probably just going to end up going to seed and then not be useful anymore. But, I just need to know what's going to happen. So I'm going to give that a try, recognizing that I probably will end up not being able to use these after all. So let's head back here to this patch here, which is a little bit of a hodgepodge. This is my sprouting broccoli, so I'm going to go ahead and get this uncovered and show you what it looks like inside. So you can see the sprouting broccoli is actually starting to put off its first sprouts. So I do need to go ahead and harvest these. These are tiny, but by harvesting these, it should encourage the plant to send out more sprouts, and hopefully we'll get a good harvest. So 3 varieties here. This is the Chinese variety. I'll put the name on the screen. And this is the first one to yield. My purple sprouting broccoli, which is a bit of an experiment, this one doesn't seem to be as strong as the other varieties. This hasn't shown any signs of yielding yet. And this is Asperbrock, which I grew last year and was pleased with. This one doesn't seem to have any sprouts yet either, but hopefully soon. And you can see in between the sprouting broccoli, I have yet another mulch of lettuce, all different varieties here. And I have onions here, which I don't really anticipate doing well because I think they're being too crowded out between the broccoli and the lettuce. But I had extra seedlings, so I stuck them in here, and I figured worst case scenario, we can harvest these as scallions, so they'll still go to some use. But this lettuce here should be the next in my succession sown plan. So hopefully this will continue to extend our harvest even more. This bed here also tends to be shadier than the rest of my garden, which I know is not ideal for the crops like the sprouting broccoli or the onions. But broccoli can tolerate more shade than many other crops, more than say tomatoes or peppers or something like that. So I put these here in the hope that I would at least be able to get some harvest from them, even though I probably will not get their maximum harvest. Now the lettuce, on the other hand, this shade will actually be a benefit because as the summer gets hotter, this lettuce would be likely to bolt and go to seed. So by putting it somewhere a little bit shadier, where it's shaded both by, the trees around and also shaded more directly by the sprouting broccoli, I should hopefully be able to extend my lettuce harvest. In case you can't tell, I'm always on a quest to extend the lettuce harvest. Now here is my final tomato patch. You can see I have a few here. These are on the smaller side, and I did the same experiment here. I put some sweet potatoes in between, and we'll just see how they do. Now on this cattle panel trellis here, you can see I've got some snap peas growing up, and across the walkway, snap peas as well. And behind that is the garlic patch. So the garlic is off to a great start. In my experience, garlic is one of the easiest vegetable plants to grow. I love growing garlic because it's one where you just plant it in the fall and it comes up in the spring. I mulch it just for water retention and to keep it nice and tucked in over the cold winter weather. Now later in the season, probably in a few weeks or so, I will have to harvest the garlic scapes, but I'm not sure why I said have to, because that's a delicious treat to harvest. I like to make delicious garlic scape pesto with those. So I really enjoy those. And then, a few weeks after that, it'll be time to pull up the garlic, and then it'll cure and store in my garage all winter. So this is a great, easy crop to grow. And so far, it looks like it's doing great. This still has a little ways till it'll be ready to harvest, but I'm really looking forward to it. Over here, I have the elephant garlic. This is my second year growing this. I planted it 2 years ago, and then I saved some of the cloves that I harvested to plant again this past year. I am going to reserve judgment until I actually harvest it, but the plants do not look as healthy as my regular hardneck garlic. So I knew that this could be a little bit challenging to grow in my northern garden. So we'll see how it does. I may not grow it again next year. Now in the back here, I have a couple sunflower seedlings that I planted. I planted 3, but this one has been eaten bare, so this one I'm thinking is kind of done. I may stick a seed in here to try to replace it, and we'll see. I did, as I mentioned was a possibility, I did plant cantaloupe seeds in these spaces between the sunflowers. My goal is to get these to kind of vine out over the walkway, and if they vine a little bit in with the garlic too, that would be okay. I've never really been successful with growing cantaloupe, but you just gotta, I like to experiment and try lots of new things and try old things that didn't work, try them again, and hopefully can eventually crack the code and get it to work. So here I just have a little ornamental pot cluster in the garden here. I planted them this year all with this beautiful New Guinean patience. And this is Creeping Jenny, which I had in the pot last year. It actually overwintered in the pots, draped down to the ground, and sunk its roots here. I know it might be considered invasive or at least aggressive, but I think it's beautiful. So it's not in the way of anything here, so I'm just going to let it grow. And back here I've just got a pineapple sage that I really just grew because it smells amazing. It also gets these really lovely long red flowers later in the summer that the hummingbirds really love, so I'm growing it for them as well. Here's my blackberry patch. I finally put up some wires to support this because these were draping all across the pathway. Now, I am not an experienced blackberry grower, so I don't know if this is the best way to support these. Looks like these will be getting flowers really soon, which is exciting. But at least for now, this at least gets them out of the pathway. So here we have the strawberry patch, which you can see is kind of finishing up flowering. So we just have a few little stragglers left. Once the flowers are done, I'm going to cover this. I want to leave it open in the meantime so the pollinators can get in and pollinate all these flowers. But once it's covered, I want to prevent pests from coming in and taking all these strawberries before we have a chance to get them. So it shouldn't be too long before these beautiful green strawberries grow and turn red and just make delicious treats for us. So thank you so much for taking a walk through the garden with me today. I really enjoyed walking through this garden on this beautiful spring morning. I'm really excited for the warmer temperatures and seeing how the plants grow and change really quickly at this point in the season. So I'm so glad you were able to join me today. I hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.